Um, so I'm Elise Tukmanian. I'm the managing editor at with Caltech Letters. For those of you who haven't heard of us, we're a student-run platform for the opinions and ideas of the Caltech community. We aim to bridge the gap between Caltech scientists and the general public, giving voice to the perspectives on broader issues in academia and science, while also helping researchers improve their communication skills. We're currently recruiting authors and editors. So if you're interested, please get in touch with us. And there's some links going down in the chat. So we're really happy with Caltech Letters to be partnering with the Caltech Wise Social Activism Speaker Series to have Chris and Kendra with us from Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. They'll tell you more about their organization, but ESAL is a national organization that helps scientists and engineers who are interested in using their skills to benefit their local communities. And they help them figure out where to start and how to engage with the many stakeholders in a given community. So we're really excited to learn more from them, and they're going to be talking to us about opinion pieces, like what we publish at Caltech Letters, and also writing like comments in local government. So really excited to have them, and I'll turn it over to Kendra and Chris.
Great, thanks for that introduction, Elise. As I mentioned, we're from Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally, and kind of before we get started, I want to kind of preface that this will be an interactive type of session, so I encourage y'all to drop questions and comments in the chat at all time. We'll be monitoring it. We'll stop periodically a couple times during this presentation to really address those and kind of give folks a chance to speak up if they want to as well. And there'll be some interactive activities, so just prefacing that for all of y'all. And as Elise mentioned, we're from Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. We're a group of, a small nonprofit group of primarily scientists and engineers who have experience working in science policy, who really want to encourage folks, especially those with scientific backgrounds, to engage at the local level, which is often an overlooked kind of piece of this field. So we'll kind of dig into that a bit more. With that, I'll just do some quick introductions. My name is Chris, as I mentioned. I'm a fourth year chemistry PhD candidate at Berkeley, and I also serve as the workshops director for ESAL. Kendra, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Yeah, my name is Kendra Zamzo. I'm a PhD environmental chemist, and I live in Alaska, currently working for a local tribe.
Great. Yeah, so we'll be your facilitators today, and kind of you can I'll be dropping some links in the chat as well if you want to kind of read. There's been some profiles, and you can connect with both Kendra and I through some of those links below. So with that, to kind of get things kicked off, why do we care so much about engineers and scientists engaging locally? And kind of the crux and the core of the mission, this is a quote that kind of really drives everything that ESAL does and kind of why we're here today. Is decisions are made by those who show up. If you're a West Wing fan, you might have pulled this from that show. Otherwise, it's not quite sure who it was originally attributed to, but we found it's really held true, right? We need to have folks in the room to make those decisions. And too often what we kind of see, not only in government at large, right, where there's tends to be a lack of scientific and engineering type of voices and evidence-based voices, but especially at the local level, we see that many of the decisions that we know could benefit from some of the data-minded and evidence-driven public policy making, and kind of that mindset that scientists and engineers bring, unfortunately just isn't there. And so how can we really encourage folks to engage where they are in their communities, kind of recognizing, right, not everybody's going to move to DC, not everybody's going to move to Sacramento for all of y'all who are in California, right? So how can we encourage folks to engage and show up where they are? So we hope today to kind of give you some tools and some guidelines to really get you started on that path. So I've been saying local government, I've been saying local engagement a lot. I will continue to say them. But I think one of the key things, one of the driving points that we want to really echo in this presentation of this workshop today is kind of thinking about what do we mean when we say local government, right? So at ESAL, we take a pretty broad encompassing view of local government, and it starts really at everything that's lower than the federal level. So in other words, we start with the state level, right? So in California, California is kind of stretching the definition of local, right? Given that it's such a huge global player. But within the state government, we really start at the top with the governor's office, the state legislature. There's a myriad of different departments and agencies, advisory boards, commissions, working groups that you can kind of dig into. But these are the types of policies that really kind of set the stage and kind of both trickle down to more local levels of government that we'll get to, and also trickle up, right? Especially in a large state like California, we see many of the policies, particularly around environmental issues in California, that inevitably get adopted and picked up by other states or by the federal government more broadly. So you really kind of like to think of states as kind of this intermediary that kind of bridge the gap between maybe larger federal government and more local government. Once going one level below, state governments, right? Now we're entering the county level. Counties also have a wide variety of departments and agencies. And at the county level, we'll dig into this a little bit more in the next couple of slides, but county level, you have departments and agencies, you have county commissioners, including particular, right? Over the past year, we've seen the real importance of public health commissions and the folks who serve on those, and different advisory boards and commissions, election commissions. Obviously, it feels like we just had an election, even though that was quite a while ago now. So all of these different counties these different county agencies and different county players also play a critical role in local government. Maybe the next one is the one that maybe folks are the most familiar with when we're thinking about local engagement. That's your city, right? So typical city government structures are going to include a mayor's office, perhaps a city council that's also elected, and then again, various departments and agencies that control a wide variety of different services within a city. Also kind of outside of these maybe more hierarchical structures, there's a lot of different ways that neighborhoods can kind of play into local government structures. In particular, we see neighborhood commissions, community response teams. So particularly as we're thinking about emergency response and some of those critical response structures, community response teams are a big part of that, as well as universities, right? We really encourage y'all are at Caltech, that is an ecosystem in and of itself, and there's a lot of policy and local engagement opportunities that occur there as well. So we encourage y'all to think about that as part of your local government structure and ways you might engage. In particular, right, this is a broad overview, but parks and recreation, school districts, utility districts, water boards, all of these include aspects of policy and local engagement that we really encourage y'all to think about as you kind of consider how you might want to engage and make a difference in your local community. So with that, the first kind of promised opportunity, we encourage you all to think about what comes to mind when you think of local STEM engagement. So you can kind of believe you should see something popping up right now, a place where you can kind of submit, type in your answers to see and kind of engage in word cloud. So what really comes to mind when you think of local STEM engagement specifically? What are the types of issues that you think folks should consider or that you're particularly interested in around local STEM engagement?
Sorry, are we typing in the chat, or is there, you said there was something?
Okay, it's not popping up. Okay, in that case, just feel free to drop it in the chat. We might be having some technical glitches here with the screen sharing. Yeah, just feel free to drop it in the chat in terms of what things come to mind when y'all think of local STEM engagement. Yeah, right, where I got some, got landfills, PFAS, wildlife management, air quality, right? All of these are great issues that include local aspects, right? Particularly air quality is one where you see air quality and air control boards in California. Wildlife management is another place. Water boards again. Yep, again, thinking more on the environmental issues side. Earthquake safety, teaching. Yeah, teaching is a critical one, right? That I kind of glossed over a bit, but we have school boards in particular, a variety of different educational policy that takes place at the very local level. And we're kind of seeing that in particular with reopening schools as well right now in mid-COVID. These are all great. And now a lot of them are trickling in, and kind of, you're all correct. And kind of what we really want to highlight here, this is an eye chart, and I know it's throwing a lot of information at you, but just to really emphasize that there's just a myriad of different, what you could consider local STEM issues that everything from within climate, within education, within energy, within infrastructure, to waste and water, right? All of these kind of encompass local STEM issues, and it's really important to make sure that we have the voices of scientists and engineers who maybe have expertise in these areas, but more broadly, who really value and follow evidence-based and hypothesis-driven policy making. So this is going to give you a myriad of some of the things. We'll dive into a couple of these in a little bit more detail throughout the presentation with some examples of folks who have done just that. So with that, again, we're really encouraging y'all to engage local, and we're going to kind of dive a little bit more into some of that in the next couple of slides. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kendra. All right, sorry, actually, before I turn it over to Kendra, I'll give you one more kind of overview of what we think about when we're talking about local government structures again, right? And this is, again, focused a little bit on the city level, but we start with residents. We start with the people who live in a community. This is all of y'all. We have typically elected positions, everything from a school board to city council to a mayoral position, and some that you may not have heard of, but actually have a lot of critical power. For example, a city auditor, and in particular right here, I'm going to highlight the city manager, right? This is an appointed position, but one that many folks don't know about. And within a city manager is really the person who has a lot of the centralized power and has a lot of the decision-making authority within a city. So it's really kind of critical to think, as you're interested in engaging locally and really understanding these different structures, who controls different issues and who has the power to make change in different issues. All of those things you just mentioned, right? Teaching, earthquake safety, environmental issues, right? All of those are going to touch or be more largely be governed by particular agencies and particular groups within a local government structure. So it's critical to kind of understand what your local government structure looks like. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat. This is based on the Berkeley City government, but I've also included a link for Pasadena. For consider how your local government is structured, who might be the best way, and who might be the best person to engage with in order to really make change on the issue that you're passionate about. So with that, in addition to kind of thinking about who you're talking to, it's important to think about when and where you're talking to folks, right? So I mentioned before, counties and cities are slightly different. So I just want to give you a brief overview. Obviously, many of y'all have mentioned before the call, you're in Pasadena within Los Angeles County, right? So generally, this is kind of, you need to go into a little bit more detail for wherever you're particularly based, right? Cities typically operate with a mayor, city council, city manager, and a city clerk structure that we just highlighted on the last slide. In contrast, counties typically can have very similar structures, but they might have different names in terms of, and different slight differences between those, where you have an executive that is typically elected, but some counties do not have this position and purely operate on a county commissioner or borough assembly type of structure. Where you then have a similar manager and a similar clerk structure. So just kind of be important to consider, again, when you're thinking about what level of government you want to engage in, what are the types of folks who you might come up. And not only who are you engaging with, but really when are you engaging, right? There's a critical part, if you're thinking particularly about advocacy at the local government level, is really thinking about when you're advocating and how you can really time your work to be the most effective. So in terms of local governments, they typically run on a fiscal year, so July through June each year. So we're coming up towards the end of this current fiscal year. Kind of thinking about in the fall, right? That is when a lot of these different local structures and agencies are doing their budget planning and kind of wrapping up things for the next year through the spring. When that budget development is kind of continued, and we'll probably see in the next month or so from many local governments releasing their proposed budgets for the upcoming year. So again, depending on what you're interested in engaging with, you might identify more strongly with different points along this timeline. If you're interested in, say, attending city council meetings, which we'll get into a little bit later, if you're interested in more the early stage, right, as people are ideating and thinking about how city budgets and local budgets are allocated, that can really impact what you're advocating for and when you're advocating. So it's important to kind of consider where you're at and keep this into account. So with that, now I'm going to turn it over to Kendra to kind of talk about taking the first step in local and government engagement.
Yeah, so what is that first step? What do you do to begin? And we're going to go through a series of steps down this road on this slide, and they can be connected or they can be independent. So the first one is maybe you have an idea you see a problem in your community, you have an idea that you'd like to find solutions, or you have a immediate solution in mind, or maybe you see something that's going on where your particular expertise would be really useful. So next slide. So if you have an idea, the first thing you want to do then is gather information around your idea to support it, or find how it could be, get the data that would support moving towards a solution. And that could be after your idea, or research could be actually independent. Just starting by watching public meetings, learning what boards and commissions are in your area and what role they play, or even networking with local advocacy groups that could either support your idea or know more about the government process and can help you navigate that a little bit. Forward. And what we really want to get to is advocacy. And what advocacy is simply getting information in front of people. And this is going to be either orally or in a written format. You can meet with your local representatives. You can give public comment orally. You can write things up and get those in front of people. Or you could be looking at supporting a measure that's already moving forward. We'll talk a lot more about advocacy in the next few slides. Advance. And then lastly, after you've gone through, you have an idea, you've done research around it, you've got the information in front of people. Maybe this is like a gateway drug, and now you're interested in service. And so you may look at joining a board or a commission, advising an elected official, or running for office. And you don't think of service as a first step, but sometimes it actually can be. So, and I live in rural Alaska, so maybe things are different here, but I walked into my local library and they said, "Do you want to be on the library board?" Yes, I know nothing about the library board. You know, that could have been a first step. I actually declined that one, but just last month, I had called into a couple of Fish and Wildlife Commission meetings following an ordinance that was moving through it. And one of them I just sat and listened, one I gave some comment. And it just happened that when I called in, it was where 3 members were terming out, and they needed 3 members to come forward. And they asked if I would give them some information on my background. The Fish and Wildlife Commission members did. They wrote me a letter of support to the mayor, and I'm now on that commission. So it's practically a first step. I'd sat in on 2 meetings. So it can be almost a first step. Next slide. And again. So here's a great example of advocating. There's 2 students, bioengineering students at Rice University. And this is a great example because it's completely non-political, and you don't have to get wrapped up into political parties. You're trying to get information to people. That's advocating. So advance. They had a situation where there were some cycling deaths at an intersection. Next slide. They gathered data around the intersection. They presented the data at city council meetings. Next slide. And this led to changes that should improve the situations. Different signal timings, crosswalk visibility, increased signage. And so it's a good example of following that process from an idea all the way through to a solution. Next slide. So we're going to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts, and I apologize. It sounds like maybe some people are having trouble hearing me. Hopefully it comes out in the recording. Again, you're going to be doing this either orally or through written or both. And generally, you look at written as being the most important because that's where you can get most of your information. All your data, your risk analysis, whatever it is, the meat that you're trying to get out there. But again, I'll give you a short example of where spoken was actually more important here locally. There's a land management area in a neighborhood near me. There has been a lot of shooting, cannons, big trucks, public safety issues going on in this area. So it was created as a management unit, and we're now writing a plan around that management unit. And it went through 2 commissions. It was headed to the Borough Assembly, which was not actually the decision-making body. We just wanted, we like this, we don't like it, and then it goes to the state as the decision-making body. I had written public comments, and then I was streaming the meeting online. My internet went down, which is not unusual. And when it came back up, they were already well into this discussion. And public testimony was ongoing. One person in the building was giving really eloquent testimony for the management plan we had worked on. 2 people who don't live in the area, they live about 60, 100 miles away, called in, said they hadn't read the plan, but they were afraid their freedoms were going to be impacted because they had big trucks. I found out 4 people had called in supporting the management plan, 5 had called in against, and those 5 stopped the process, despite the fact that the assembly members in their packets had many letters, every single one, which was in support of the management plan. So that was an eye-opener to me. So I guess I am now going to have to not only write, but also call in. That was a lesson for me. Next slide. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts. There's 2 different situations. One is you have an idea and you want people to figure out, learn about your idea, get interested in it. And one is there's already policy that's moving through and you want to get information about that policy, support, oppose, tweak, whatever that is. So first off, if you're going to give oral comments, you're likely to have to sign in. And when you get to a meeting and sign in, there may be 2 different sign-in sheets. One might be for general comments. This is stuff that's not on the agenda, and this is where you would sign up to give your idea, talk about your idea. The other might be for specific legislation that will be discussed in the meeting, and so you would sign in on that sheet. So just be aware there could be different sign-in sheets, different processes for how to give comments in different places. Ideal outcome is that you're listened to. Either someone follows up with you, likes your idea, or your ideas get incorporated into policy. Next slide. So first, again, find the right place to give your testimony. A lot of legislation will go through advisory boards first, and it could be tweaked. The legislation could be tweaked in those advisory boards, or it could be sent back to the original authors. These are often places where you can give public comment, and a lot of people don't necessarily attend these. Fewer people then will go to a decision-making body. And so you might be able to speak at a Fish and Wildlife Commission, a Parks and Rec Commission, a Planning Commission, and at an assembly or a city council level. So target where you want to give these comments and whether you want to do it in multiple places along the way. And what's going to be on, whether legislation is considered will be on the agenda. So go to your government website, look at the agenda, find out when the topic you're interested in will be introduced and when you can give your comments. So again, check upcoming meeting agendas. They'll have, meetings may be 2 hours long, they may be 6 hours long. So it's not going to say public comment at 8:45 p.m. It's just going to be somewhere in the agenda. And of course, public comment is often 3 minutes to 5 minutes long, so you need to be really concise. You need to get people's attention, bring up a point that maybe they hadn't considered, or find a unique way to address something that captures their attention a little bit. And sometimes you're not saying I have a solution. You're saying I have a concern or an idea. Bringing a printed copy of your comment can be really important. I was giving testimony one time in a large meeting, and there was a stenographer, and sometimes a lot of times there'll be a borough clerk or a stenographer for meetings. They like to have the written comments, partly because they want to know how to spell your name, but also you may be talking a language that they don't know. if you're talking about a particular chemical or particular process, if I say redox, I know what redox means, oxidation reduction. The stenographer doesn't know what that means or how to spell it. So to capture things accurately, it can be really helpful to go up to a microphone, say, my name is so-and-so, I come from so-and-so, I'm speaking on this legislation, and I've brought a copy of my comments. Or if you're calling in, which we're more likely to do now, you can call in and say, I have emailed a copy of my comments and it should be in your packet. So those are good ways to. Obviously, arrive on time, try to stay for the duration. Again, that could depend on how long the meeting is and where public comment is taken. Be respectful, be polite, recognize everybody has expertise. It might be business, it might be social. The science doesn't always win the day, but it's great to have it brought forward. It's often completely missed. Know your audience. So written public comments is what a lot of us are interested in because we don't like going in front of microphones. We don't like giving oral testimony. It's uncomfortable sometimes. And this is also where you can get really into the meat of things. So next slide. My background and experience is mostly with really large mining projects, mostly those proposed in Alaska. And so I'm often looking at permit applications, and I'm talking about projects that are small cities. They use the amount of power that a city in Alaska would use. They have or they propose to have roads that are 100, 200 miles long, pipelines that are 100, 200, 300 miles long carrying diesel, barge traffic, ship traffic, new ports. I mean, one single project can have so many different permit applications, and that's a lot of what my background is in looking at. These permit applications, there'll be a lot of individual ones. They might be for stream crossings, right-of-ways, things like that, discharge, wastewater discharge. These will all be posted on government websites, or you can also sign up for email listservs. So I have the state of Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. They send me every single wastewater discharge permit that someone has applied for. I may delete 90% of those, but I may have 10% that catch my eye. So if you have a particular interest, you might want to get on a listserv. Newspapers, I don't know how, I think that might be declining now with the decline in hard copy newspaper. That has been really important for us. In my little community of 200 people, I had a neighbor reading our local newspaper where it was required that this be posted. And that's how we found out that there was going to be mining exploration literally in my backyard. And we had not heard about it anywhere else, but this small little newspaper required notice. So depends on, what's your, where do you get your information? But those are places. Usually permit application comments, they'll take it for 30 to 90 days. There may or may not be any public hearing to give oral testimony. You want to be focused and specific. You want to bring in some data if you can, support your position from a scientific standpoint if you can. But I should also give a caveat for both oral and for written. You're a citizen, you live in that place, your opinion matters. So you may not have the data and the background, but don't be afraid to go forward and say, this is my opinion. Just be careful how you frame it. If I go in and I'm giving, whether written or oral, I might, if I'm doing it as an opinion, I say, I'm Kendra Zamzo. I have lived in the Matanuska Borough for 30 years, and I've lived in the state for X number of years, and I'm concerned about this issue, and this is what I support or oppose. And if I have some information that backs it up, that's good, because a lot of times just support or oppose in written comments is completely ignored. In oral comments, it matters. So everybody's opinion should be heard. So just be aware of. I'm not going to go in and say I oppose sidewalks in that area because I live there and I don't like them. I'm not going to go in and say, I'm Kendra Zamzo, I have a PhD in environmental chemistry, I have all this background, and I oppose that sidewalk, because it's irrelevant. My PhD, you're doing yourself a disservice. But it doesn't mean you can't go in and have an opinion. Just don't give your academic background. Don't come from that side. Okay, let's look at different kinds of public comments.
Yeah, thanks, Kendra. And I'm going to pause just for a minute here to see if folks have any questions or want to jump in on anything that we've said, we've talked about so far. I think Kendra raises a really good point where, right, public comments, especially now via COVID, it's more are more accessible than ever to kind of give your input, and really not maybe perhaps not based on your scientific expertise, but more broadly as a member of your community, you're entitled to have an opinion, and you're really encouraged to kind of be an active and participatory member of your community. So I encourage y'all to kind of consider that as you do this. And seeing no questions, I'm gonna kind of keep going ahead. Again, feel free to drop them in the chat at any time. But we recognize that many folks, right, public comments, this type of thing, maybe not be your cup of tea, but again, there's a myriad of different ways that you can kind of engage your community. And we recognized, right, that y'all have Caltech Letters here, and many of y'all are interested in writing. As someone who's done a lot of science communication myself, right, I think there's a particular brand of science communication that we use for science policy, and really ways that you can structure your writing and kind of your use those communication skills to really target policymakers and affect change in your local community. So we're going to go through a couple of them. I've highlighted here 3 different types of science policy writing. One would be one-pagers. Another one is policy memos, and finally op-eds. And we'll do a little bit more of a deep dive into op-eds towards the end, since I know some of y'all are interested in opinion writing. But all of these are all great ways to kind of communicate science policy and engage in local issues, but they all have very different uses and very different target audiences. So it's kind of important to understand the nuances between the different, when you're kind of deciding, okay, I have an issue, I've identified an issue in my community that I care about, I've identified the proper body and the proper timing, right, that we kind of talked about before, how and when to engage. And now I can think about how specifically do I want to engage, from the comfort of my home even. And thinking about what's the best way to do that to be effective. So kind of, let's start with one-pagers. All right, and this is digging a little bit into, I'm dropping a link in the chat. The American Geophysical Union has some great resources on how to craft an effective one-pager. But really the point of a one-pager, typically these are done, well, sometimes they're done in conjunction with a legislative visit, and I encourage you to visit the ESAL Playbook. We have a whole playbook guide similar to the one Kendra went through for public comments. We have a whole playbook guide specifically on visiting with state legislative folks, in case any of y'all want to engage with folks in Sacramento, either in person or virtually these days. There's got just for that. But one piece of that is, right, one-pagers are kind of a single-page document, really concise, something academics are maybe not known for, with a clear ask and kind of information about the issue you're advocating for that you quote unquote leave behind or hand to folks, right? So some things that this should include: contact information, very succinctly, 3 main points, kind of a specific ask. And this is where we sometimes see folks get sidetracked. I'm not knowing quite exactly what you want to ask for or what you want your audience to do, right? So you have to be very specific, and the more actionable you can kind of make your desire, the better, and the more likely that you're actually going to get a meaningful response. One-pagers are one of the few kind of places where it's really useful to use in policymaking to use images or very simple diagrams, right? We know a lot of folks with science and engineering backgrounds have great data visualization skills. So kind of putting those to use and kind of communicating the most effective, your message most effectively. And of course, relevant facts, information, and really selective or minimal or not at all references, right? So this one-page document is not really the type of place to dive into the nitty-gritty detail or provide a lot of references or background information. It's really a high-level type of document that you can use to get folks' attention, and something that they can remember you by, especially if you're doing this as part of, you can even create one-pagers and leave behind documents if you're doing public comments, like Kendra mentioned, making sure that they have a hard copy or something you can leave behind once they've forgotten, or if you're one of 20 visits to your local policymaker that day. It's really helpful to have these very clear and concise types of documents that they can refer to and really use to contact you and follow up on in the future. So that's kind of the gist of OnePagers. And again, I encourage you to kind of look for examples. AGU has some great ones in terms of how you might consider structuring these. The second type of documents that we want to talk about here is really policy memos. So as opposed to one pager, right? They mentioned one pagers are a little bit more, are definitely much briefer. Policy memos can range in length from anywhere from similarly a page to maybe up to like 4 pages or so. Typically a bit longer document that not only talks about an issue that you're interested in and provides that background, but also specifically provides some analysis of that issues and makes clear recommendations for a specific audience on a particular issue. And I'm highlighting those 2 points for it last because I think in particular for policy memos, the more specific you can be, the better, right? For example, if you're interested in some of the environmental issues we talked about before, if you're interested in, for example, mining in your backyard, which maybe is less of an issue in Caltech, but right, you're specifically talking about what is the specific audience that can they do about it? If you're just talking generically to as a legislature, maybe you're asking them to convene hearings. Maybe you're asking them to investigate. If you're talking to an agency representative or maybe someone has much more direct control over it, your ask is going to be different and your message and how you communicate that message is going to be very different. So again, kind of thinking about that framing, how you do to do that for policy memo. And so I kind of outline some of the things up here, and I'm dropping a link in the chat for a policy memo that was written by some graduate students and some friends of mine out in New York advocating for standardizing climate education, specifically talking to the state legislature. So that's a great example if you're interested in kind of how you might target a recommendation very specifically around an issue to a group. In this case, they were talking about legislation, so they're specifically talking to the elected officials. But typically you have an executive summary, right? This is a brief mini memo. So your memo, right? Everything, your background, your asks, your recommendations should all be included in this. You can think of it a little bit as like an abstract, right? They function very similar ways to an academic paper's abstract. Similarly, again, then you offer background, and really this should be specific context for your proposal, right? So you're not necessarily going to have the time or space to explore every way that your particular issue has been considered, but really what is the most relevant information for someone who, again, probably when you're communicating this with them, especially if they're an elected official, they probably don't have the background or are up to all the details on any particular issue that you're advocating for, right? Especially at the local level, people are chronically understaffed. There's not the level of expertise you might see typically at federal level or even at the state level in California. So really providing that context and doing as much of the legwork for folks as possible is important. Of course, getting into the meat of it, the policy options. So not only outlining a couple different policy options, one of which could just be the status quo, right? One of your options could be no change, but you really need to address the cost benefit of that, including not just kind of financial considerations, but also political feasibility and pros and cons. And of course, making your clear and final ask in whatever recommendation that you're asking for. This is kind of a general structure that applies to a lot of these different types of writing, but particularly for policy memos, this is kind of a structure that we recommend using. And finally, I'm going to dig a little bit more into op-ed writing. So again, I'm going to provide an example here of this is actually from another graduate student here at Berkeley who studies material science, and she was really interested in the use of plastic. So she wrote an op-ed for the San Jose Mercury News on this issue. But op-eds, again, are going to be on the shorter side, typically no longer than 700, 800 words max, and offering what is hopefully a unique perspective, right? So this is the most opinionated. This can be the most personalized of all the different types of science policy writing that we've talked about so far. And it's written for a more general audience, right? Typically, these are published in generic newspapers, local publications. So you really need to make it accessible, and this is perhaps follows most closely. You can kind of leave your academic hat behind a little bit in this case. And science might not be the perspective you're going for. This might be kind of reflecting a little bit on, again, your role as just a resident, as a member of the community. So you're targeting your message again, kind of based on your publication. Policymakers can also be included in your target audience, right? If you go and visit, I've visited folks in Sacramento on several occasions. If you look on their desks, they're all going to receive copies of the local newspaper in their district to kind of keep up to date with what's going on in their district. So this can be a great way to kind of target your message indirectly at folks by putting it where they're already looking. we encourage you to, again, highlight local impacts, and again, stories and data kind of in conjunction are op-eds are a place where that really shines to strengthen your main point and to kind of drive home that message, again, using narrative and personal voice. So that's kind of some generic considerations. I'm going to dive a little bit more now in this next slide about really the steps to break down an op-ed. And I'm going to also drop a link in the chat for the op-ed project, which was started by a coalition of different science policy groups that really outlines. The document and the project itself is a little dated, but the tools and resources there are still excellent and really drives home the point and kind of different considerations and how you might target an op-ed. But first, kind of as you're writing an op-ed and thinking about how to structure an effective opinion piece, particularly around science and local engagement, you of course want to grab your reader's attention with a lead, right? Whether that's something that's in the news, some personal anecdote. Again, op-eds should ideally be timely and kind of really reflect a current need in your situation. So think about, why am I writing about this issue now? Why should someone care now is always the best way to start. You want to introduce yourself and kind of connect with the audience. And again, this could be your credentials. This could be as an issue that you particularly care about and are passionate about, but it also could just be from personal use, right? So from the example I've highlighted there, Katie, again, is a physicist who studies, does some work that can maybe tangentially be applied to plastics, but she's in no way a plastic recycling expert or anyway, but she is a member of her community that cares deeply about kind of conservation and kind of environmental issues. So this is kind of presenting why you care about this particular issue and why you want your audience members to also care about these issues. You're making your case, right? Again, as with any type of communication, especially within the science policy and local engagement realm, you are thinking about what action you want your readers to take. It's great to kind of voice your opinion, have folks hear them and kind of maybe change minds, and that in and of itself might be your goal. But also thinking about, okay, if you get folks on board with you, if you're ineffective and they agree with you, what action can they actually take? Whether that's encouraging folks to go and do some of the things we talked about, go to a city council meeting, go deliver public comments, go solicit proposition, go encounter voters, voting in and of itself. All of those are different ways that and actions that readers could take. And then again, kind of recapping, always tell them what you told them and remind them what you told them is a great strategy for any really type of that. So that kind of breaks down some of the pieces of op-ed writing. And now I'm seeing in the chat that there's checking out the Caltech letters is could be a great place to publish. I've also published with this similar parallel at Berkeley, which is our daily Cal newsletter that has been great for specifically addressing issues that impact the Berkeley community or the UC Berkeley community more specifically. But I think definitely scientific voices are not typically what you see in a lot of these op-eds, right? A lot of them don't typically include that. So in our experience, editors are really welcoming of kind of hearing from a diverse range of perspectives, and you bring that. So I encourage you to highlight that and bring that out in kind of your writing. I'm gonna pause now to give folks some time for questions. We do have a couple more things towards the end, but I really want to make sure we give folks time to ask and answer any questions that y'all have.
Can I ask a quick question?
Go for it.
So a lot of what you've been presenting so far has been in a kind of quite, I guess, collaborative environment. And it's like, groups of people who are working together to get to the right answer. And I imagine like lots of issues fall into that bucket, but there are also lots of issues where there's just a fundamental conflict of interest. And, often this can be, just like a housing developer and who wants to, destroy some existing structure, or, as Kendra mentioned, mining companies maybe want to do extractive mining and damage the environment. And I was wondering what suggestions you have when there is kind of a fundamental conflict. Do you think these methods still work, or do you need to be kind of more forthright, more aggressive in your advocacy?
That's a great question. Kendra, do you want to take a stab at that? I think you have a little bit.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, because that's the space I'm in most of the time. I guess first off, there's defining whether there is an actual conflict. So right now we're in the borough, we're working on an ordinance on wetland mitigation, where if large projects go through and they're permitted by the Army Corps, but they're on borough lands, the Army Corps has not been very good about requiring mitigation, and the borough has a proposal to require that. There's business development that is in the borough that's very much against that. But we think part of that is really an education issue, that they don't understand what a wetland mitigation bank is, and they don't understand how wetlands support the fish and wildlife that brings in a lot of income into our borough. So right now we're working on a fact sheet that explains a mitigation bank, and then there's an interest in meeting one-on-one with decision makers. So that's one way, is it really a conflict or not? And then there is something where it is a fundamental conflict. If something happens, they're absolutely incompatible. You cannot have a large mine and something else in the same place, or a lot of active shooting and family-friendly camping in the same place. Then it is more a matter of trying to get enough, more and more people to understand, to gather people that you think have your position, gather them in force and get them to make their voices heard. And that is a little more aggressive, or at least it's a bigger outreach issue of pulling people away from their daily life long enough to pay attention to this issue, contact their representatives, either with opinions or with facts. It can't, and sometimes things end up going to court. And then that's another way of communication, is you may get pulled into giving expert testimony.
Yeah, I think definitely one of the points that Kendra brought up in coalition building is a kind of big part of so much of what drives local engagement and local policy. So the more it's definitely, you can have some effect by visiting with your elected officials or delivering public comments, but really part of it is just a numbers game and thinking about how many interactions and how many different voices. This is something in particular as someone who's kind of worked with the California State Legislature in the Bay Area, right? Also not super close to Sacramento, maybe slightly closer than y'all, but it's not feasible. It's just not possible for most local groups to kind of engage in the same way that maybe more vested, more moneyed interest can. So really thinking about building coalitions and kind of using some of these tools that we've highlighted through local engagement, through kind of using your writing, through op-ed writing and things like that, to really still make an impact and kind of build coalitions and that can actually more effectively do change than rather just one individual person.
I wanted to ask if you're using a university blog as a retired faculty member, are there limitations to what you think you can write? Like a lot of my stuff is political. Well, that's not a lot of it, but I keep wondering, should I be writing anything political or not? And I think that, the audience has to just know that you don't represent the university. I mean, I don't have to write a disclaimer every sentence about that, but the question is, are there limits? I certainly try to keep it intellectually, have some intellect in the articles and not just write garbage, but and I try to double check things and make sure they're truthful, but you definitely you have to get in, especially the last 4 years, you had to get in politics to discuss anything at all. So I just wonder what people think about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think you're right, exactly. It's threading a thin line, and I'm sure Caltech has policies similar to how Berkeley does in terms of what they can and cannot advocate for and what you're using official university resources for on behalf of the university. So I think always just being very clear who you're representing. I think Kendra highlighted this when she was talking about public comments, right? I'm here as an individual, I'm here as a person, and maybe you might have to say more explicitly, these views do not represent those of the university or whoever you're affiliated with. Kind of being very explicit about that as much as you can. I agree kind of what you're saying. Sometimes it's not as simple as just providing the evidence and kind of hoping folks go with it. Sometimes you do have to get engaged and kind of understanding how the politics work and how those different structures work in order to get your message driven home.
Yeah.
I do keep hoping that we'll get back to where you could, different things that need to happen. People are going to be looking at how much should government be doing, how much should private business be doing, how much should be public money, private money, and so forth, moving things through. And those are different political positions, with Democrats generally wanting more government involvement and Republicans generally not. That used to be the way things were. And I think those are really healthy discussions to bring forward and find different views and maybe different solutions. It has been, yeah, I think we all know, extremely challenging when we're no longer all working from facts. And I don't really know what the solution is to that. If you're bringing facts forward, all of that, any way to bring facts forward is important. It's often ignored now, and it just becomes what tribe do you belong to? And I don't know where to go with that anymore.
Well, I have the university has never, to my knowledge, written a policy restraining what you can say on a blog. But I'm a UC Irvine, and our present chancellor and our past head of the law school, Erwin Chemerinsky, are experts in fighting for free speech and academic freedom. So I've always felt I have a little protection.
Yeah, it's definitely something you always have to be aware of. I'm not sure if any other folks had questions. I know we have just about 5 more minutes. So I might go through a couple more slides and kind of really encourage y'all to check out our local engagement playbook, which again, I'll drop a link in the chat here. But you heard Kendra walked a little bit very quickly through the playbook we have for delivering public comments. And so we have playbooks on a variety of different issues. Some of these have step-by-step guides, similar to what we showed today. Others also include examples and stories from our blog, where we feature scientists and engineers and local organizations that do a lot of this work. So you can kind of see not only how to do it, but look at examples similar to Catherine and Mary of folks who actually did it. So I encourage y'all to go through this and please use it as much as you can. And we're kind of gonna leave you, not quite leave you, but encourage y'all to think about what actions you specifically will take. I know it's easy to sit on a Zoom meeting on a Thursday afternoon and then kind of move on with your day, but we really encourage y'all to think about what actions specifically you want to engage with in your local government communities, and whether that's, one of these different things from the playbook that we just mentioned, right? Maybe one that we didn't quite get to today, or it could be something as like writing an op-ed for Caltech Letters, or attending a city council meeting or something like that. So we encourage y'all to really think about that. And we really want to also hear either now or in the future kind of what you're thinking about and how you want to engage in that. And a bit to that point, right, as you're kind of brainstorming that now and over the course of the next week, maybe, we also want to hear from you and kind of, as ESAL, we really like to feature a lot of the work of scientists and engineers, particularly those who are engaging in their local community. So we have this template for you here, which again, I'll also drop in the chat, where this is our local engagement postcard. So you can see there's at least one example up on the website already. There's a couple more similar blog posts, but this is designed to be a very simple template that you can edit. And really all we're talking about is the first step, right? We know that the toughest step to local engagement and getting involved in your community is really that first step. And kind of understanding that, we really want to kind of mitigate those barriers and kind of encourage y'all to take that first step. So what did you do? How did you do it? And kind of what was the outcomes? Can be very simple, very basic, but we'd really love to hear from you, and we'll be sending kind of this in one of our follow-up emails as well to kind of prompt you on, kind of remind you all about that. While you're on the ESAL website, there's a ton of different resources. We've mentioned the blog. We've did some highlights from there. We've talked about our local engagement playbook a lot. We also have our local STEM database and some COVID-19 resources that can help you find wherever you are, kind of different organizations and other folks doing what you're doing. You can kind of mention coalition building before. This can be a great way to kind of do it, so you're not always doing it all alone. We encourage you all to add to that as well. And finally, ESAL does a lot of different events as well, even now in the virtual world, probably more than ever, where we have different issue-focused panels, workshops like these, happy hours. We're at a bunch of different conferences, and we're on Twitter pretty actively. On that note, we have had some recent ESAL events just in the past week, in the past month or so, as part of our COVID conversations series, which will continue. So really thinking about, as COVID drives so much of today's discourse, what are ways that scientists and engineers can engage locally? And we've had some really great speakers. All of these recordings are up on our YouTube channel, if not, and also included in blog posts on the website, so you can catch up on all of them in case you missed it. And there will be more future events like these and others, so you can check out the esal.us/events. And our the ESAL team is small but really rapidly growing, and we encourage y'all, if any of y'all are interested in getting more involved with ESAL, we'd love to have you. I believe we have an opening for a graphic design person, so if you want to get involved in some of those kind of like the beautiful designs you saw on the last slide, we'd love to have you. You can check it out, or if you have other ideas how you would want to get involved, I encourage you to email us. This is not even the whole team, there's a couple more folks who have been added on since the slide was made. So we really have a great group of folks who are really passionate about local engagement. We'd love to have you join us. And again, stay in touch. You can subscribe to our newsletter so that you get a monthly newsletter with all those events, with those blog posts and everything through our website. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for your attention. And yeah, we hope to hear from you again.
Thank you guys. This has been really awesome. And I think one of the biggest things that highlighted for me, or I've been thinking about, is like, it sometimes seems like you have to start doing this all on your own, but there's so many people, even just on this call, who are interested in doing this. And there are groups at Caltech who are interested in activism, both like the Social Activism Speaker Series Committee and like the Caltech for Black Lives group. So I think, try not to get too overwhelmed too. Like, there's a lot you can do by working with other people who might have similar interests as you. And like Caltech Letters, we love to support people who have an idea. But I think it can be overwhelming looking at it all. So thank you for breaking it down for us into little steps. That was really awesome.